Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Cohn. I understand some of you may have been startled by that banging noise that just occurred. What happened is some static electric...
I'm a university student, and like most people in my position, every little bit of extra cash goes a long way. That's why, midway through the semester, I decided to pick up a part-time job as a ramp agent at the local airport. If you're unfamiliar with the position, I'm the person responsible for loading and unloading baggage from airplanes. Occasionally, we also handle cargo that's a bit unusual. Every now and then, we transport dead bodies in specially marked cargo bins. One particular night, I found myself assigned to handle one of these flights. To make matters worse, the weather was horrendous. Relentless pouring rain, strong gusts of wind, and lightning striking alarmingly close by. As luck would have it, my manager chose me to handle this plane. When we're throwing a plane, it essentially means I'm the one tasked with pulling the cargo out of the storage bin. I'd already had a long day of classes, and I was exhausted, but it was the last flight of the night and I figured I'd power through. Thankfully, there wasn't much cargo to unload. My coworker, Matt, drove the ramp loader into position and raised it to the plane so I could walk up the conveyor belt and get inside the storage bin. The space was tight and uncomfortable, but I kept my distance from the white cardboard box that was clearly marked as containing the dead body. I was the only one in the bin, so I tried to work as quickly as I could. I was more than ready to get home and crash for the night. The conveyor belt moved at a painfully slow pace. It's designed that way to allow the team on the ground to scan each item as it's unloaded. I had been stacking packages for maybe 5 minutes when I noticed the lightning outside becoming more frequent, each flash brighter and closer than the last. I had my earbuds in, trying to tune it out, but then a deafening crack of thunder filled the air. The sound was so loud and jarring that I lost my balance and fell onto the floor of the bin. My heart raced as I instinctively looked up, and that's when I saw it. The single most terrifying sight of my life. Near the far end of the storage bin, the lid of the cargo container holding the body had come off completely. But that wasn't the worst part. The body, which had been lying flat, was now sitting upright. It had moved with such force that the lid was flung off. I was paralyzed with fear for a moment, but as soon as I snapped out of it, I bolted down the conveyor belt as fast as I could. My coworkers were shouting at me from the ground, but I barely registered what they were saying until I was off the plane. That's when I heard it. The plane had been struck by lightning. Shaking and out of breath, I tried to explain what I had seen to my coworkers. I'll never forget the looks on their faces, pure terror. The color drained from their skin as they listened to me describe the body sitting up in the bin. After about 5 minutes of nervously discussing what had just happened, my manager told me to head home early. I didn't argue. I spent the entire drive home in a daze, replaying the scene over and over in my mind. I didn't know if what I'd seen was real, if it was just my exhaustion messing with me, or if there was some rational explanation. When I finally got home, I got a text from one of my coworkers. He had gone back into the storage bin after I left and confirmed that the lid to the cargo container was indeed off. But the body was no longer sitting up. It was lying flat, like it hadn't moved at all. In the days that followed, I did some research, trying to find any cases where a lightning strike could cause a dead body's muscles to contract and sit up. I came up empty-handed. To this day, I have no idea if it was the lightning, a trick of my fatigued mind, or something much stranger. What I do know is that I couldn't bring myself to return to work. The next morning, I quit my job at the airport. No amount of money was worth the trauma of that night. The summer of 2012, when I was 11 years old, the family and I had a trip to Universal Studios planned. Our flight was booked for midnight on a Tuesday to save money, and my mom figured my sisters and I would sleep through the flight. My sisters were 9 and 6 at the time. The gatehouse was mostly empty as we waited for our flight. My mom went to the bathroom with my youngest sister, and a minute later my dad told me to wait there and watch my other sister while he went to grab a last-minute bite to eat at the cafe. As the middle-aged woman came and sat next to us, she put her hand on my back, acting all excited to see us, and asked where our parents were. I told her they would be right back. Then a middle-aged man came over and started acting just as bubbly and affectionate toward us, as if he knew us. The man then proclaimed that he had just run into my dad at the cafe and finally introduced himself and the woman as our dad's cousins. My sister and I looked at each other and both said hello really shyly. The man reached out his hand for my sister to grab, while the woman reached out her hand for me to grab. They told us to follow them because they wanted us to meet their kids. My sister and I naively got up, took their hands, and followed them. The two started leading us out of the gatehouse, past the cafe, down the stairs, and toward the lobby of the airport. When I realized they were leading us to the entrance of the airport, toward the parking lot, I finally asked, "Where are we going?" The woman looked at me through her thick-framed glasses and with her cheeky smile, said their kids were outside by the car. As we walked outside into the dark parking lot, I looked at my sister and became really uncomfortable. I broke my hand free from the woman and said we wanted to go back inside while also taking my sister's hand from the man's. I noticed the two looked at each other, their cheeky smiles both gone. The man turned quickly to us and then aggressively wrapped his arms around me, while the woman did the same to my sister. They started to literally carry us closer to the parking lot as me and my sister screamed. We heard yelling in the distance from two men who turned out to be airport security. The crazed pair let us go and ran faster than I'd ever seen anyone run, quickly disappearing into the parking lot. One of the men chased them down, or at least tried to, while the other talked with us for a bit, and then led us back into the airport to our parents, another sister. It had only been a few minutes and my mom was already sobbing like a baby. Being that I was so young makes this a really weird and uncomfortable memory to think about. It's also strange to realize I didn't see any red flags when the two didn't give us their names. I live in Denver, Colorado, but because of my job, I often find myself in entirely different cities for the weekend, or even for a few weeks at a time. My work is similar to that of an event coordinator, which means I frequently have to travel across the country to be present at various events. My company covers my flights, but no matter where I had to go, it always felt like they were putting me on the cheapest flight available. I get it. They're trying to save money. But it usually resulted in pretty miserable flying experiences. To say I encountered some strange characters would be an understatement. Still, I didn't mind too much. As long as I arrived at my destination in one piece, I was happy. Or at least that's what I thought. This story happened when I was at the Atlanta airport, catching a flight back home to Colorado. It was a Sunday night, and I'd spent the entire weekend working at an event. Of course, I had to be in the office early Monday morning. I was so exhausted that I practically dragged myself to my gate. My flight was split into two parts, Atlanta to Phoenix, and then Phoenix to Denver. The first leg of the trip wasn't too crowded. I had a window seat and there was only one other person in my row, a middle-aged man. He looked pretty unremarkable, though his clothes were noticeably old and worn. Then again, who really dresses up for flights anymore? We made some polite small talk for a few minutes, but honestly, I was so tired that I just wanted to lean against the window and try to sleep. I pulled out my phone to watch something while I rested, but before I could even close my eyes, I noticed the man glancing over his shoulder at me. At first, I brushed it off, figuring he just wanted to look out the window. Then, I heard him mumble something like, "Oh, great. Just ignore me then." I wasn't sure if he was talking to me or to himself, but it happened several times. I convinced myself I was just overthinking it until I noticed him furiously scribbling something in a leather-bound notebook. Curiosity got the better of me and I tried to peek at what he was writing. The page was packed with tiny, cramped handwriting and I could barely make out any of it, but then I saw it. My name. He had written my name down. I vaguely remembered mentioning my name during our brief conversation, but this still felt deeply unsettling. I tried to make out more of the writing, but it was impossible from where I was sitting. The realization that he was writing about me made it nearly impossible to relax or fall asleep. When we landed in Phoenix, the passengers began filing out of the plane. I expected the man next to me to start gathering his things, but he just sat there, head down, making no effort to move. When it was our row's turn to exit, he still didn't budge. The rows behind us started filing out instead. I finally spoke up, explaining that I had a connecting flight to catch and needed to leave. Without lifting his head, he mumbled, "I'm gonna follow you. You're not leaving this airport alive." At first I let out a nervous laugh, hoping he was joking, but the tone of his voice was deadly serious. He eventually stood up and let me pass, but as I exited the plane, it became clear he was following me. My casual walk turned into a brisk jog, and when I glanced over my shoulder, I saw that he had picked up his pace too. After about 5 minutes of this, I reached the gate for my connecting flight. Trying to stay composed, I approached the desk and explained firmly that I didn't know the man standing behind me and that he had been following me. At first, the staff chuckled, thinking I was joking. But when they saw the panic in my expression, their demeanor quickly changed. They asked to see our boarding passes. I handed mine over, and so did the man. The employees made a few phone calls, and after a short exchange, they told me to follow them. They escorted me through the boarding door and closed it behind me before the man could follow. They seated me early, about 10 minutes before the rest of the passengers boarded. Once everyone else was on board, a woman sitting behind me leaned forward and asked what had happened. I gave her a brief summary, and her reply chilled me. "Yeah, that guy completely lost it after you got on the plane. He was screaming and pulling at his hair. The police actually had to come and take him away." Her words horrified me. I started to believe that the man might have truly intended to harm me. It was clear he was dealing with some sort of mental health issues, though I can't confirm that as I've heard nothing about the incident since. If that was the case, I genuinely hope he gets the help he needs. My wife recently took a trip to Texas with 4 of her girlfriends. I was her ride to the airport and was there for her ride back as well. I waited around in the lobby for a while. Her flight ran a little behind schedule, so it was about 15 minutes late. I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw my wife, Emily, and her 4 friends heading over in my direction. Emily waved happily and ran over to give me a big hug and kiss. I said hello to all her friends as well. Emily suddenly started patting her pockets, and a concerned expression appeared on her face. She looked at me and told me she lost her wallet and keys. So Emily and I, along with one of her friends who was kind enough to help out, all went back up to the terminal. We looked everywhere and asked one of the airport workers to have the plane checked for a wallet and keys. Long story short, we spent a great deal of time searching the airport, only to find nothing. She insisted she had both the wallet and keys after she left the plane, though. Eventually, we had to call it quits and went home. A worker assured us that if the items turned up, we would be contacted immediately. Emily was in a sour mood the whole ride home because of it. When we got home, Emily went up to our room, and I could hear her throw her giant bag onto the bed all the way from downstairs. I was in the kitchen about to make a quick snack for myself when the scream of my wife from upstairs hit me cold in the chest. I ran to our room to see her pointing at the bathroom door. I looked at it and then at the 2 closet doors across the room. They had both been opened, and all of our personal belongings had been thrown all over the floor. Boxes were opened, with papers that were once inside them scattered everywhere. She stuttered out the words, "There's someone in the bathroom." To me, I felt like my heart stopped in response to those words, but I had to be the man of the house and step up. I tried the doorknob to the bathroom, but of course, it was locked. Emily left the room in a hurry, which I later found out was to call the cops from downstairs. I started ramming at the weak old door sized with my shoulder, and after 5 solid hits, I busted the door down. But the bathroom was empty, and the window was jammed completely open, wide enough for someone to squeeze through. I comforted Emily until the cops arrived. Listening to her description to the cops was bone-chilling. She had just thrown her bag onto the bed, not even noticing the closets yet. Out of nowhere, she felt something brush past her. When she turned, she saw a massively tall man walking toward the bathroom, staring at her the whole time, with wide eyes and a blank expression. She was only able to get a scream out after the man locked himself in the bathroom. It's safe to say he found my wife's keys, wallet, and so on. An easy opportunity to break into a house. We had our locks changed the next day and never saw the man again. This happened a few months ago. I'm 27. I was at LAX airport in Los Angeles with 5 friends. All of us were about to fly down to Texas to spend the week in a beach house. We had a few more minutes to kill in the airport before we would board our flight, and I suddenly really needed to go to the bathroom. I was baffled to see a line stretching out the door for the bathroom. I noticed a janitor walking by, so I asked her if there was another bathroom nearby that wouldn't be so crowded. She leaned in and told me she shouldn't really be telling people, but there was another bathroom past the door she was pointing at, down a narrow flight of stairs and to the left. I thanked her, because she was extremely nice and followed the directions she gave me. Sure enough, behind that door that no one would think to open was a small stairway that led down to a really poorly lit, skinny hallway. It was so narrow that if 2 people were to pass each other, one person would have to press against the wall to make room. I found the bathroom right away. The door was extremely heavy and hard to push. The lights inside the bathroom were on, and it was filthy in there. It was clear that nobody ever really came in there to clean. Now, this is a little embarrassing to mention, but when I go to the bathroom in public places, I always try to make sure nobody else is around to possibly hear me. After checking the stall to see that it was unoccupied, I stepped back into the hallway for a second to take a look in both directions. To the left, there was someone standing at the end of the hall in a dark, unlit section of the hallway. It was a disturbing sight, to say the least. All I could do was awkwardly pull my head back into the bathroom and try to pretend we hadn't seen each other. I went into the stall and just stood there, biting my fingers for a minute, dreading the thought of that door opening. And of course, it did. I saw the man's black shoes stop in front of the stall door as he walked into the stall next to mine. He shut the door, and then there was silence. No sound of the man unzipping his fly or sitting down. Nothing. I realized I didn't really have to go anymore. As I reached to unlock the stall door, I looked up and saw the man's head peering over the stall, looking at me. I nearly had a heart attack as my screams bounced off the walls of the tiny bathroom. I ran back up those damn steps through that door and casually walked back over to my friends. I was breathing heavily, but nobody seemed to notice. I didn't tell anyone because it was embarrassing and I didn't want my friends to make fun of me. I know that seems stupid now. We went on to have our Texas vacation and all had a good time. But of course, the thought of that creepy man haunted me every night that week. It was minutes before boarding my flight to Atlanta for a job interview the next day. It was on a stormy March night, and everyone was bundled up and keeping to themselves. I was sitting in the terminal room, waiting for my flight to be called. It wasn't going to be a very busy flight because there weren't many people in the waiting area. Someone sat down 2 seats away from me, which wasn't too weird in itself, but it was also a bit annoying considering most of the seats were open. But it went from annoying to downright disturbing when I looked at him to see him weirdly staring at me. I looked away and pretended not to care, but I could tell he was still looking at me. Then he leaned over to me and whispered close to my ear that the 2 men sitting a row across from me were going on the same plane and were planning on kidnapping me once we landed in Atlanta. I didn't know what to say other than, "What?" The heavy man then got up and walked away. At the same time, my flight was called, and I nervously boarded the plane while paying attention to the 2 men. They sat down ahead of me, and as I walked past them to approach my seat, they both stared me down. At that moment, I started to wonder if that man's warning was true. A few hours later, we arrived in Atlanta, and on my way out of the plane and leaving the airport, I cautiously looked around, trying to spot the 2 men. When I was finally outside in the dark, cold parking lot, I spotted them. The 2 men were peering their heads at me from around a red minivan, and I guess when they saw me looking in their direction, they hid behind the van. I walked back inside the airport, waited half an hour, called for a taxi, waited for it to pull up front, and rode to my hotel. So many questions remain. I don't know who that man was who warned me. I don't know how he knew about those other two men, and I have no idea what they were planning on doing to me, if they were actually looking to kidnap me. This happened around 12 years ago when I was about 8 years old. My family has always loved to travel, so even by that age, I had flown on airplanes more times than I could count. Because of this, I was pretty familiar with our local airport and its layout. This particular trip, we got to our gate about 2 hours early. I remember waiting for roughly an hour when I realized I had to use the bathroom. I told my parents, and since they knew I was familiar enough with the airport, they let me go alone. So off I went. I made the usual 5-minute walk to the main bathrooms, which I should mention were the only ones I knew of. It was around 4 a.m., and I guess that's when they cleaned the bathrooms because they were completely roped off and closed. Being an 8-year-old and not the best at making decisions, I decided to wander through parts of the airport I didn't know well to find another bathroom. My wandering took me to a hallway that seemed separated from the main airport area. At the end of the hallway, I thought I saw a bathroom sign, so I headed that way. But when I was about halfway down, I noticed a head peek out from around a corner. It was a man. "Hey kid, come here," he called. Without thinking twice, I kept walking toward him. At that moment, I genuinely thought he was an airport employee who was going to help me find a bathroom. But instead, the man told me he was lost and needed me to help him find the right gate for his flight. At the time, I completely believed him and was actually excited to help. Since I was familiar with parts of the airport, the idea of helping an adult made me feel important. I told him I'd be happy to help, but I wanted to let my parents know first. I wasn't even thinking about safety. I was just excited and wanted to tell them what I was doing. I turned around and said I'd be right back. That's when the man started yelling at me, saying we didn't have time because his flight was about to leave. I told him I'd be quick. As I exited the hallway, I glanced back and saw the man rushing out of the hallway and down the stairs that led to the airport's exit. I thought it was strange, but I didn't say anything to my parents. After finally finding a bathroom I could use, I forgot about the whole thing. Fast forward to a couple of years ago when I was talking with some coworkers about strange things we'd experienced as kids. That memory suddenly came back to me. Now that I'm older, it only took a moment to connect the dots and realize how dangerous that situation actually was. It's chilling to think how close I came to being in serious trouble. Looking back, I definitely should have told my parents right away. I just hope that guy didn't try the same thing on other vulnerable kids like me.